Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com. During my recent live stream on twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming, we did an experiment. I took all 6 magic classes through Veteran Blessed Crucible solo to see how they played with the exact same gear, champion points, food, and potions. I wasn't using any mythics or trials gear, just a very simple beginner-friendly loadout so this information could be applicable to the average ESO player. You're going to want to watch this video for a detailed, comprehensive solo Magicka class guide. The pros and cons of each class with my opinion and ranking on how they fare after playing them all back to back. Each class in the Elder Scrolls Online can function at a high level, but it's shocking at how some are very gear and champion point dependent while others can shine with a simple and basic setup. If you like this type of content, don't forget to click that like, subscribe, and leave me a comment so this type of video can grow. You know, the YouTube algorithm and all. Now, let's talk about the specifics on my generic setup and get into the classes. Thanks for watching. For my gear choice, I went with a common 2 5-piece and a monster helm loadout. This is the simplest and most easy to obtain PvE DPS loadout that's both effective and a part of the base game, so it's applicable to a wide audience. This is not mid-max to the gills, though I have those loadouts on my website, link in the description below. A common magic DPS setup is Mother's Sorrow on the body combined with Medusa's on the front bar. Mother's Sorrow gives you an enormous critical chance rating. This can free up your Mundus choices to things like the Shadow, and it's from Oberland to Sean, cheap and effective and can be bought on the traders. While Medusa from the Ark's Corinium dungeon gives us critical rating as well, but an important buff, Minor Force on a front bar. This simply saves us from using a skill like Barb Trap for melee magic builds coming from the Fighter's Guild, or Channel Acceleration for range magic classes coming from the Psijic Order, keeping things simple and effective. Monster Helm wise, I went with Narayaneth from Crypt of Hearts 2. It's good, both single target and AoE, and again, it's a part of the base game, so it's very easy to obtain and a staple now that procs can critically strike. If we look at my simple and yet highly effective Microsoft Paint gear chart, I go with 6 light and 1 medium to have a good blend of sustain and damage. I go with all divines on the body and Magicka glyphs. I'm using a double staff setup with the fire on the front and a lightning on the back, with precise on the front and infused on the back, enchanted for weapon and spell damage. Dragonknights may want to use the charge trait on the front as it drastically helps with sustain, but to keep things even, I went with precise. I go with the lightning staff on the back bar rather than a fire because it's much easier to sustain. Using a skill like Unstable Wall of Elements with the lightning staff gives a chance to proc off balance. You'll see a circle above the target's head and an off balance text cue. This allows you to complete a fully charged heavy attack in a small window and gain double the resource sustain. Moreover, lightning staff is easier to aim and channel and actually complete a fully charged heavy attack, not to mention it does great AoE damage. Fully mid-max, I go with the fire staff on my back bar, but for the average player, this is a strong choice. Here's a rundown on my champion points. For Warfare, I went with Thaumaturge, Fighting Finesse, Deadly Aim, Master of Arms. For Fitness, I went with Boundless Vitality, Fortified, Bastion, and Siphoning Spell. I use spell damage potions that provide 100% uptime on spell damage and spell critical buff. You're going to want to make sure you have the medicinal use passive maxed out in the alchemy tree to get this, along with Clockwork Citrus Fillet Gold Food. Now for the generic build that you can use to fill in with class-specific or outside your class-specific skills. The most important ability we have on our back bar for survivability comes in the form of Harness Magic from Light Armor. This is a shield that scales off your max magic, meaning the higher max magic, the better. We cast this when taking damage, expecting a high amount of damage, or oh crap moments. This, along with many abilities that heal you while doing damage, is what makes magic builds so much more survivable. 2 offensive skills that I use: Elemental Drain from the Destruction Staff. This lowers resistances on mobs, thus increasing your damage, and also adds a bonus of resource sustain. Some classes, like the Magdan, have Major Breach built in, so you don't always have to use the skill. Second skill we've already talked about, and that's Unstable Wall of Elements. It does great damage over time, proc status effects depending on the weapon you're using, and weapon enchants, meaning we're going to get more spell damage while we're on our front bar, thus keeping this up as a priority number 1 in your back bar, and fill in other ground-based AoEs depending on your class. The two ultimate choices that are good regardless of class is Flawless Dawnbreaker on your front bar. Merely slotting it gives you this extra 3% spell damage via the Fighter's Guild passive and ultimate upon killing enemies. Back bar ultimate is Mage's Guild Shooting Star for a good burst ultimate that does great damage over time with some ultimate return so we can cast it more frequently. Now at endgame for solo play, folks typically aim for 2 item sets that carry sustain and survivability. One of them being Pale Order, a mythic that heals you based on damage done. This is mind-numbing survivability and something I don't actually recommend as a new player because it'll carry your survivability so greatly you won't understand basic mechanics of solo play without it. Another one is False God's Devotion, a trial set from Sunspire that reduces magic cost, gives magic on kill, and major expedition. This completely carries your sustain, allowing you to drop skills like Elemental Drain or Consuming Trap. I'm not using either of these because these will skew your thinking that a class is very strong when it's actually your gear that's carrying you. Now we're going to go through each class in order from least favorite to most favorite, and I'll be giving you my pros and cons of each. And to start, let's go with the Dragonknight. In the number 6 position, the Dragonknight, which has recently seen some buffs, but I don't think frankly enough. The buffs have come form of sustain with the charge trait, which increases the chance of applying status effect. Namely, Dragonknights want the burning status effect as magic because the combustion passive gives back 1000 magic each time it's applied. This can be applied automatically with your burning ember skill, so it happens frequently with a very short cooldown in between. I did not use the charge trait for this experiment, and I could feel the difference, essentially having terrible sustain. Another way the Dragonknight sustain is through the use of Battle Roar passive in Earthen Heart, giving back all resources, Magicka, stamina, and health when using ultimate. At 500 ultimate consumed, you'd receive 25,000 magic, stamina, and health. And this is what makes the Dragonknight unique, is that your resource sustain via the charge trait and the Battle Roar via ultimates. Another pro to the Dragonknight is massive amounts of damage over time effects for all your fire attacks, including the burning status effect, which provides an extra 4-second damage over time. Your whip is much easier to manage now, and now including the Seething Fury and building up the stacks to get a massive single target whip, again, very easily. But overall, the Dragonknight was by far, and I mean by far, the weakest when not using Pale Order, charge trait, or false gods, and let me explain why. The main reason classes like the Templar or the Nightblade are so dominant solo as magic is their main spammable heals them, meaning you do not have to let up per se on your damage and attack to survive. This is the exact opposite of a Dragonknight that's not using Pale Order. Go to whip, you're vulnerable. Sit on your back bar for too long without any heals over time coming in, and your health drops like a hammer until you span shields and run out of Magicka. Switch over to your front bar, then you're stuck spamming burning embers until a cauterized heal procs. Beyond that, the Dragonknight lacks an execute like other classes, making it weaker during the final phases of your attack. And you're very dependent on your Standard of Might ultimate for both damage and protection and even resource sustain. If a mob moves out of it, then you're wasting a hard-hitting ultimate and it can get frustrating. In summary, the Dragonknight shines in solo PvP, not so much PvE. You have good on-demand healing, and with a skill like Cinderstorm can even have good heals alongside a restoration stat. But in PvE, the moment I go through my offensive rotation solo, I'm immediately hit like a hammer, then I have to turtle up, play defensive, whereas most other magic classes, no wait, literally every other magic classes, didn't have this problem. Just like the stamina DK, I love the class, just feel without the triumvirate of Pale Order, False Gods, and Charge Weapon trait, you're pigeonholed into a dot class that really struggles to maintain dot solo due to all the incoming damage and lack of heals per second. Moving on to the number 5 spot, and that's the Necromancer. This was really hard to put in the 5 spot because it performed very, very well. In comparison to my Stam Necro, Magic Necro was pretty good. The damage was noticeably higher than other classes straight away. And you have the best ultimate in the game for damage, Colossus, giving 12 seconds of 10% increased damage done in a massive AoE. It costs little over 200 ultimate. Drop this, even solo, everything just melts. Your Blast Bones is a tricky part to the class and the build. It's unique in that it creates a corpse which can be used to feed your sustain and damage. But with a 2.5 second delay in travel time, it's constant babysitting nightmare thinking about your next attack and when your Blast Bones is down. I started playing better with the class, telling myself that as soon as I go to my back bar, I cast a Blast Bones before. As soon as I come to my front bar, I cast a Blast Bones. This was way easier to get my head around the class and do better consistent damage, and it shines in that department for sure. Then the really fun part of the class, which is using corpses for massive damage over time with Mystic Siphon and also restoring magic and increasing our damage done for just slotting the ability. And another corpse would go to Mortal Coil, giving us healing per second and increased healing done for slotting it plus stamina back, feeding both of our resource sustain loops, Magicka and stamina. And for the granddaddy of them all, Spirit Guardian, reducing damage by a whopping 10%, healing us and feeding our sustain loop with the Undead Confederate passive. The synergy of keeping up all of these abilities meant it was an incredible resource sustain, even stamina, along with insane heals per second. Thus, I was able to cast my main spammable Ricochet Skull, and I wasn't nearly as vulnerable as a Dragonknight because I had so much heals coming in per second, it didn't matter that I wasn't using the Scythe ability for healing. I could just sit there and face tank nearly everything and had a much better time in sustained survivability department. So what are the cons? A few cons to the class, and the obvious one is very complex. I highly recommend players unfamiliar with buffs, debuffs, complex rotations, super tight timing to stay away from this class at least to start. Because when you constantly focus on Blast Bones, which optimizes your DPS, you forget about situational awareness and can easily die. Believe me, I did. The Necro also feels a bit slow. No source of major expedition, which normally isn't an issue using sets like False God's Devotion, but becomes apparent without it making you feel a bit slow and clunky. And lastly, the class lacks an execute, which is somewhat annoying in comparison to other classes. Overall, I had a much better time with my Mag Necro than my Stamina Necro in the content. I found it much easier to sustain and survive while still doing great damage. Also, this still too was a bit complex for my liking and clunky in comparison to our next class, and that's the Warden. For whatever reason, I really love the Magic Warden in PvE. While it has something similar to Blast Bones, which is Deep Fissure, a 3-second delay nuke that applies Major Breach, reducing armor from every enemy hit. This on paper sounds just like Blast Bones, but feels much easier to manage and apply, especially since the visual indicator when it goes off is much more noticeable. The AoE damage is very impressive because you have this in a built-in really good back bar damage over time like Winter's Revenge, which does great damage, snares, and a chance to apply the chilled status effect. Combine this with unstable a wall of elements lightning staff and opponents will be chilled, off balance, and stunned constantly. And just like the Standum, the Magden, while not as high DPS in my testing, has some of the best passives in the game via the Animal Companion skill line. Bond with Nature gives you health each time your companion skill ends, which is nearly all the time. You get 12% magic and stamina sustain just for slotting Animal Companion abilities, and the mightiest of them all, Advanced Species, a flat 2% increase in damage just for slotting a skill on your bar in the skill line. Thus, solo, slotting Birds of Prey on our front bar gives us 5% via Minor Berserk and another 2 just for slotting it. Not to mention you can activate this ability and grant Major Expedition, leaving classes like the Necro in the dust. The major cons of this class is you're pigeonholed into using the Eternal Guardian Bear Ultimate for all of those juicy passes I just listed. I'm not a big fan of using the bear, but can say it does a lot of things for you, including stuns and being a decoy and doing good damage. I also noticed much less single target DPS without an execute like I had on my Stamden. Thus, the class excels in large AoE encounters, then really slows down during a major single target boss fight. You also don't have a main spammable that heals you. This isn't a major downside because you have so much passive healing coming in durability you feel much more tanky than a magic DK, but still nothing compared to a Nightblade and a Templar. Overall, I really enjoyed the Magden, and I still can't put my finger on it. It hits hard, moves quick, durable, but can be a bit hard to manage deep fissures, just like Blastbone for the Necro. Let's move on to another class, and that isn't that hard to manage, and that's the Magic Sorc. What I enjoy most about the Magic Sorc class is you have so many ways to play it effectively. Using no pet, one pet, full-on zoo build with 2 pets and a monster helm that gives you another one. I choose to play the one pet with the DPS focused morph, though solo you may want the healing pet morph Twilight Matriarch. The advantage in terms of survivability of the Sorcerer is the skill Critical Surge. This heals you for critical damage done, has a very long duration, and provides spell damage buff to you. Not to mention you get more spell damage just for simply slotting it due to a passive. This acts like a sort of pale order passively healing you, allowing you to be extremely aggressive without dying. It's exactly what the magic Dragonknight lacks that you have as a sorcerer. Even though your main spammable doesn't heal you, Critical Surge will definitely do that. Another strength of the sorcerer is its simplistic nature and rotation. If you like using a pet like I did, you free up 2 bar slots, making your build even simpler. Thus you are casting Crushing Shock, waiting for the hands to glow, and that unmistakable crystal frag sounds to ring loud, firing off a C-Frags for a cheaper cost, more damage. And yeah, this C-Frag also heals you via blood magic passive, making you guessed it, even more tanky just for throttling down doing damage. And when you use the pets, they do a lot of work for you. With constant damage over time and the ability to make them hit harder, pet-focused builds that parse with the highest out there. They act as decoys that give stamina and health recovery for slotting and increase your max health by 8% while active. Okay, Deltia, Sorcs sound great, why aren't they number 1? The cons: the Sorcerer feels very single target focused rather than massive AoE. This is great in long veteran dungeon hard mode fights or trials. But some encounters I would be single target attacking multiple mobs wishing it was on my Templar. Also, the Sorcerer benefits greatly from the pet gameplay. In fact, using 2 pets could be argued as the best build, though incredibly boring, non-fun, and I didn't choose it for those exact reasons. You also have an execute on a magic sorcerer of around 20% health rather than 25 or higher, but at least you have one. The Sorcerer is really up there for solo play and something I can recommend due to critical surge effectiveness, making it great for new players or endgame alike. Moving on a list, last 2, which were a struggle to rank, but let me make my case. Number 2 is the Nightblade. The Nightblade hits the sweet spot in resource sustained damage and ultimate generation. The ability Soul Harvest feels like the great strength to the class, giving you 10 ultimate per kill, while slot of this on your front bar. Slot a Fighter's Guild ability on your front bar as well, and you'll get another 3 per kill with the Banish the Wicked passive. Thus, you can roll back-to-back ultimates in large trash pulls, especially if you're using Mage's Guild Shooting Star. One of the strongest damage abilities in the game, and that's Merciless. For 40 seconds, you're going to increase your weapon and spell damage by 60 every time you light or heavy attack up to 5 times. That's going to give you an awe-inspiring 300 spell damage for maintaining 5 stacks. At 5 stacks, you can shoot off an Assassin's Will, firing a spectral arrow for half the cost that deals a massive amount of damage, and you guessed it, heals you for 50% of the damage done if you are in melee range. No other class has that built in. And also it has the Hemorrhage passive, giving you 10% critical damage done. But where the class really shines is healing via your 2 main spammables, AoE Sap Essence and single target Swallow Souls. Swallow Souls will heal you over time for 35% of the damage done, giving you a very strong heal over time. Remember talking about ultimate again? Well, the transfer passive will give you 2 ultimate every 4 seconds while using a siphoning skill that generates a massive amount of ultimate. Moreover, you'll get 8% max magic for slotting a siphoning ability. Combine this with Mage's Guild Inner Light for freakishly high max magic, which equals bigger shields. Sap Essence, the AoE ability, also heals you for each ally hit. Combining the 2, you'll have incredible self-healing while doing damage. This is what separates the Nightblade and the Templar, your ability to do massive damage and heal yourself, lowering the need to constantly apply shields, buffs, and debuffs, throttle down on massive damage, and survive. Last major advantage is insane resource sustain with skills like Siphoning Attack, giving you not only magic for light and heavy attacking, but healing health as well. And another passive, Executioner, restoring magic after you damage an enemy and it dies by you. And we're not done with passives. Another one, Refreshing Shadow, increases your magic recovery by 15%. You have unmatched sustain and nearly the best self-healing spam in the game, allowing you to spend less time defending and sustaining, more time doing damage. So what are the cons of the Nightblade? There aren't really much cons if I'm being completely honest. You have an execute that doesn't heal you like a Templar. It was hard ranking the Nightblade in the number 2 spot here instead of the Templar. But what separates the 2 is the ease of play. The Templar effortlessly mowed down through the dungeon like butter. The Nightblade, I had to spend a little bit more time with buffs and debuffs and looking at my skill bar, and I had a whopping 6 buffs or debuffs I needed to maintain. It's the level of complexity that allowed me to rank the Templar ahead, especially since solo play, you don't see the advantage of range like you do in group encounters. Without further ado, my beloved Templar, number 1. Yes, this is my main. Yes, this is my favorite class, but putting these classes side by side, but it was the Templar that was the most effortless to clear these veteran dungeons. The reason being, I've said it once and I'll say it again, Puncturing Sweeps is the single greatest ability in ESO. It acts as single target damage, AoE damage, huge radius, passives for slotting it, and heals you an enormous amount based on damage done. It's the only ability you can click while in the heat of the battle and not die, no matter if it's single target or 12 mobs surround you. It just gets stronger. The Templar also has increased damage done by 10%, just like the Nightblade via the Piercing Spear passive. And the Templar has Balanced Warrior passive, increasing spell damage by 6%. Without having to slot anything, cast an ability, it's just passively granted. Not to mention, you're the only class that gets Minor Sorcery, increasing your spell damage by 10% for 20 seconds via the Illuminate passive, making casting a Dawn's Wrath ability a priority. There's more to the Templar than that. It does fantastic damage with 2 hard-hitting damage over time effects from your class. One being Blazing Spear and the other Solar Barrage, which increases your light and heavy attacks by 40%, giving you a massive DPS advantage while having good AoE. Another damage ability, Purifying Light, soaks up damage like a balloon and leaves a healing circle at the target's feet. Keeping just this up and doing sweeps is enough to solo nearly every encounter in the game. A skill PvE folks still sleep on is Living Dark. This heals you for every half second while taking damage and scales in effectiveness off of max spell damage and max health. While I've already talked about a lot of ways Magpar can increase spell damage, cast this bubble for 6 seconds with over 5,000 spell damage and you'll see what I'm talking about. Your health will not move no matter how many things are beating on you. This remains true in PvE and PvP. Templar also remains the simplest. Instead of a very complex rotation, you can load up your bar with Mage's Guild and Fighter's Guild ability for passive benefit. Put a few dots on your back bar and then go to your front for sweeps until your heart's content. You also have an Execute that heals you based on damage done. Yes, the morph is lower damage, but you won't be vulnerable when executing sub 30% health. And if this wasn't enough, you get crazy sustain and survivability too from Channeled Focus, Minor Mending, Armor Buff, Healing, and Magic Return. The Nightblade may have better resource sustain, but the Templar has effortless DPS survivability and great damage without being overly complex or cumbersome. When I started this experiment, I figured Nightblade would win, but when I started watching the footage again, the Templar just melted everything without fail, and I didn't encounter a single hiccup. When you play these classes in a vacuum, back to back to back, without fancy gear that carries your sustain and survivability, you can really see the pros and cons. I hope you got something out of this video, and if you would like me to do something else for group, PvE, PvP, whatever, hit that like, subscribe, leave me a comment below. Also make sure to check me out on twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming where I play and test these builds live with PvP and other content. Thank you for watching.